Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0, episode 80 coming your way. So we're going to do oral reviews of Beligas Pharma. It's going to be a really good podcast. We're going to talk about the advantages of using oral steroids. We're going to talk about Beligas' top oral options and their reviews that we've found throughout the internet. They're all over different social media, different forums. We're going to talk about how to stack and cycle these orals so you get the most out of them. We're going to talk about why we trust Beligas. So let's start off with oral steroids. Now, what are oral steroids? They are the oral form of anabolic steroids. Chemists, they sat in a lab. They came up with different ways to extract these hormones and modify these hormones, and they came up with different ideas. And one of the ideas they came up with as well was, instead of having to inject these hormones, after they synthesize a testosterone, and after they synthesize dihydrotestosterone, after they synthesize other hormones, they can actually create an oral option instead of injectable. And there's a lot of different advantages to using oral steroids. And at the end of the day, because the oral steroids are in oral form, you don't have to worry about injecting. You don't have to worry about drawing the oil. You don't have to worry about needles being around the house. So a lot of people go with orals. I've known people that have been doing steroids since their early 20s, and now they're in their 50s and even 60s, and they've done nothing but oral steroids throughout their life, and they're perfectly fine. So the myth out there that you can't use oral steroids is just not true. And you can use oral steroids, you just got to use them right, just like you have to use injectable steroids right. And we're going to get into a lot of different oral options. We're not only going to talk about oral steroids, but we're going to talk about their ancillaries that you can use, because Beligas has you covered, whether it's on cycle, off cycle, and even, a fat burner option that they have, which is clenbuterol. And we're going to get into that as well and tell you all about them. So it's very, very important that when it comes to you using these orals, that you use them right so you get the most out of them. One of the biggest mistakes we see, I was thinking about it today because someone put up a thread about weight training, and they were talking about, some tips to weight training and stuff. And one of the things that I noticed working out in gyms is that people aren't training properly, and they're not training optimally. They're training to set some result. So the same thing with oral steroids. A lot of you out there are using these oral steroids and you're not using them optimally, and you're wasting them. So we're going to help you on this podcast. We're going to show you how to use these oral steroids, and we're going to give you the reviews from guys who have used, and gals who have used, these oral steroids and have really had excellent results, because we do see them on the forums through logs. We see them out there on social media and stuff. Go ahead, Monster.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Steve. I mean, maybe it's one of those things that I'm the old man in the corner of the gym in terms of training, Steve, and I have to sometimes remind myself, well, not everybody wants what I want from the gym. I will literally analyze why I had a good training session. Is this the right way to do the movement? Am I cheating? Am I doing what I need to do optimally, and so on and so forth? And I mean, one thing that I would love to expand on when it comes to orals, and I've posted about this multiple times. One of our fellow podcasters with his own channel, etc., I won't name him on this show, but I really do get on with him. But this is the one thing that we disagree on. He'll say, for example, you can only run oral for 3 to 4 weeks. No, absolutely not. As you said, Steve, at the beginning of the show, there are people that don't like needles. They don't like injection. We've done a show specifically on the whole subject of the issue that your better half, your partner, your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your whatever, doesn't like the idea of you using syringe and needles. And we did a show specifically on syringe and needles and this issue. So the idea was that, you especially if you got, it's a new partner, you've got kids, you're not allowed to, I don't like the idea you having steroids in the house. The same, like a loaded gun, because the idea is that the kid might see the syringe, they might associate it with drug use. That's what the other person's doing, even though you've made a decision, and so on. So people are way more comfortable on that aspect alone with the idea of using products like Beligas orals. Absolutely. Again, the 4-week thing's rubbish, right? How many times have I said when we brought this stuff up, right? And I'm going to quote the person himself specifically, because it's this idea which I've said of like for like. And the reality is, I can't think of maybe one oral steroid that you would run at a relatively high dosage that would match the high dosages that you would use with injectables. And of course, there's a great argument to be made for the effects on the body, the side effects on the body of an injectable steroid versus oral steroid. But the reality of the situation is thus, that for the most part, and let me just use Dianabol as an example, we would probably recommend somewhere between 30 milligrams to 50 milligrams. We're going to get into this during the show. And we're going to say how we would run it and stack it and so on. So 30 to 50 milligrams a day, that is 210 to 350 milligrams a week. Now, if that was an injectable steroid, you're kind of really talking, apart from TRT, you're kind of really starting around the 350 milligrams. 200 if it's part of a stack, 300 if it's part of a stack, maybe 300 milligrams if you were just running a single oral all on its own. So it's kind of the starting point. The reality of the situation is, and my fellow podcaster would be the same, is that you're looking at 1 to 2 steroids for a stack. You're certainly probably going to, I would say the majority of people run more than 300, 350 milligrams of a single injectable oral steroid. For example, the renowned 500 milligrams of testosterone a week is a great starter for a lot of people, and so on and so forth. So I said again, if the side effects on a like-for-like milligram per milligram basis actually doesn't make any sense to argue that way. We understand the chemical makeup of orals. We understand the effect of that chemical makeup in order to get through the liver, in order for you to get the biggest dose you possibly can of each pill, each tablet, each capsule that you're taking. It needs to be chemically treated in the lab and so on and so forth. So all of these things balances themselves out. Now, as Steve knows, I've run multiple 6-week, I've done 4-week cycles, but I've done a lot of 8-week cycles over my time. I can't say that in my head now at this point in my career that I would like to run more than 8 weeks. I'd probably keep it shorter. So there's that aspect. I certainly would be looking at injecting. Certainly, as we've discussed on a recent show, we're looking at TRT. So anything that I add to my TRT in the not too distant future would form part of the stack, and so on and so forth. Let me touch on something else, and this goes back to the training thing. So I'll just knock that other subject out the way for you. Any steroid cycle, oral or injectable, from Beligas, I don't want you, and this is one of those sort of insider training tips, and it's expanding on what Stevesmi said just now. I don't want you to suddenly become serious about your training or your nutrition or your rest or your recovery or other aspects outside of the gym and in the gym, not including PEDs, when you go on cycle. And this used to happen a lot, Steve. I think this actually kind of happens less now, but some people are still guilty with it, and you need to have this in your mind. So what used to happen is people that were really bad with their diets, kind of lazy with their training. We get plenty of guys, and we understand what life's like. They say, oh, trained on and off for the last 10 years. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean you trained for 6 years? How have you only been training for a few months since you come back to the gym? What was your training like when you were there? Why have you become serious about your training now, and so on and so forth? So the number one piece of advice would be tidy everything else up. All of your aspects, all your nutrition. You're being lazy with nutrition, let's get that sorted. Start getting into the good habits with nutrition. Start prepping your meals. Number one. Number two, have you trained where you could have trained harder but decided not to? Was you running against the clock, or was it just simply, oh, this is difficult, but now I'm going to use a steroid, all injectable. I'm going to make sure I get the most out of my training. Tidy it out. Start getting the most out of your training before you put the PEDs in, before you start the oral stack, before you start using any Beligas oral. Get that right. Rest and recovery. No boozing away at the weekend. No couple of beers during the week. Again, if there is a great argument, that Steve and I have made this before multiple times, and again, would agree with a fellow podcaster, what the fuck are you doing having a beer during the week and using oral steroids? If it is an argument to be made for the impact on the body of using orals, don't add to that impact by beering it or having a shot or whatever. We get what, young party time, stress from work, we get that. but you're going to be using an oral steroid and you're drinking beer. Might only be a couple of beers. It's never, no one ever admits to cane in it, Steve. They never admit to 8, 9, 10 beers. Also, oh, it's just a couple of beers. Motherfucker, it's probably a beer every night. Come on. So tidy that stuff up. Your rest and recovery. Make sure you start getting your 8 hours. Make sure your food's on point. Make sure your training is doing what's supposed to be. Maybe it might even be something, Steve, that and this probably applies to some of those people that you're looking at today. Sometimes it's just not having a end game in your mind, a focus. It might be a body fat percentage. It might be a new PB on the bench. It might be looking good for the beach. We get those things, but have that. You can do stuff like that during the year. It doesn't have to be the same thing. I cycle my training. One of the tricks is just to change your workout completely. I might even do a workout, a scheme, a program, Steve, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And what can be a bit of a head fuck when you come off cycle is trying to be anywhere close to those big numbers, the way that you looked, etc., when you was on cycle, how you looked at the end of the cycle, the great result. And you could see my abs, I could see my serratus, my quads were popping. Come off cycle, it's not the same. Well, do something different. Do CrossFit for a few months. Start doing 5Ks again. Get your head around doing other things, but at the same time, nutrition, good training, and so on. So these are things. Again, this is just simple stuff, real simple stuff. But sometimes we get busy, we forget, we're not working with a PT, we're not working with a coach. And again, this is why we encourage logs on a form. So it's that kind of situation. And here, do all of those things and then introduce your Beligas orals. And trust me, because you've kind of trained yourself to be good in all those other aspects, because you've got those things clean and tidy and on point, because you've now got to focus your training, because you're actually training like you should have been training before, like your diet should have been like before. Every single log that we've seen where their food prepping has been the most successful of the logs, because their food is physically there for you to see, and you're seeing all the training numbers, you're seeing everything they do, they tell you what's going on in their life. Those logs are successful, and that means when you introduce your Beligas orals, the chance of a success is that much higher. I'd actually say, Steve, it's somewhere between 90 and 95%. Something might come up, but for the most part, if you do those things, if you get that stuff right, and then introduce a sensible oral steroid stack, cycle, singular or multiples, and you run it exactly the right way, arguably, Steve, that might be where you could just do your 4 weeks. And here's another thing. This is another good idea, Steve, when it comes to relatively short cycles of any description. So 4, 6, 7, 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. If you do a 20-week injectable cycle, you can't do more than one of those a year, really, because you should be having at least another 20 weeks off. So you'd actually be into year 2 if you started to do another 20-week cycle. I am no fan of those at all. But doing a short oral cycle, 4, 6, 7, 8 weeks. So let's say if you just did 4 weeks, Steve, you could do multiples of 4 weeks, at least 3 4-week cycles a year with double that time off, PCT recovery, keeping the muscle, keeping the shape, etc. Again, if you did a longer 8-week, you could still squeeze in 2 to 3 of those a year. Now, look at the gains that you might get. Let's just use 4 pounds. That's kind of achievable by pretty much everybody. Again, maybe 70, 80% of the listeners could do an 8-week cycle and gain 4 pounds. Well, 3 of those, Steve, is 12 pounds. And 12 pounds is a lot of muscle tissue on the average Joe. It's a huge amount of weight on the average woman, but it's a big amount of weight. It's over 1 inch on a person of average height. So that is an inch on your arms, an inch on your chest, an inch on your quads. And that's doing a real simple, straightforward 6 to 8 week cycle 3 times a year, with time off in between, good PCT, good ancillaries, and anything else that we're going to talk about today in terms of reviews and product description, etc. So to me, I'll just reiterate, just to sum up, tidy nutrition, training focused, having an idea of what you want from the workout, rest and recovery on point, minimize, even better, cut out the alcohol and the side things that was holding you back a little bit. Get that stuff ready, start doing those things, get into good practices prior to going on to an oral steroid from Beligas, and then bring in the oral steroid. And it's almost Steve, a guaranteed good result for the listener in that particular regards. What do you think on that before we move on?
Yeah, and I was gonna bring up, a couple points, but you definitely hit the nail on a couple of those points I brought up. But let me just end this segment like this. When it comes to the advantages of oral steroids, Mobster gave some good advantages. And what he said, basically, it works like this: is with an injectable steroids with long esters, the long ester injectable steroids, you will safely, if you want to recover properly, be able to do one or two a year, as Mobster said. But with an oral, you could do three
Yeah,
or four a year because they're in and out of your system
yeah,
quick. So one of the advantages of orals is the flexibility. They have short half
yes,
lives. You could stop
yes,
and start them. Let's say you're on Winstrol, you're 2 weeks or 3 weeks into Winstrol, and you're like, you know what? I don't like what this is doing. I don't like what it's doing to my joints. I don't like what it's doing to my hair. You can stop taking it. And a few days later, most of it is going to be out of your system because of the short half life. With an injectable, if you're on an injectable with a long half life and you decide, you know what, I want to come off, it's going to take weeks for it to be
yeah,
out of your system. So, orals, you got the flexibility with orals that injectables don't have. You can use orals not just solo, but you can also use them stacked with injectables on top. Instead of doing another injectable, you can do an oral instead and start and stop it at your leisure. And the thing is, you can use orals to kickstart a cycle. You can use orals to finish a cycle. In fact, professional bodybuilders do exactly
yes,
that. They
yes,
they will use something like Winstrol, which, for example, which dries you out like nothing else, and they'll use it toward the end of their cycle going into the competition, and they'll come off their injectables because they want the flexibility of using these oral steroids. So there's definitely a method to the madness, and using orals is a weapon that you should be taking advantage of. And we're going to get into the top oral steroids with Belagas now. There's something else you want to add, Monster, before we move on?
yeah. I was just going to say, Stephen, you mentioned the professional thing. I said, why is it, right? When the oral steroids have this reputation for being dangerous, and we understand, as I said earlier, on the chemical processes. Why is it that there's an issue necessarily with the length of time that you're going to use it? If if that's the case, why are top professional athletes, and I don't just mean gung ho go, don't care what happens to their body, but top professional athletes will still include oral steroids on their stuff. Just recently, and I mentioned this in another show, I think I've mentioned it on the forum, that a buddy at the gym competing for an amateur competition, not a professional, using 100 milligrams of Dynabol in the last couple of weeks, 100 milligrams of Anavar in the last couple of weeks. And this is professional bodybuilders doing exactly that. What I've said on other shows, if the shorter half life, and this includes short ester injectables, is great for a professional bodybuilder because it's quicker in, quicker response, and quicker out. I mean, just as an example, Steve, and I've said this just on Debol. How many times have I said on shows when I was using legitimate Debol like products from Beligas, the first 4 days was a pound a day? How quickly was I gaining? How I know how strong I'm going to get when I use a product like Beligas Anavar. I know the results. I know the impact it's going to have on my body. I haven't got to wait weeks, like Steve said. I haven't got to worry about products clearing my system. So that flexibility, like Steve says, is fantastic for professional, fantastic even for amateur competing athletes, bodybuilders, MMA fighters, etc. Quick in, quick results, quick out, and it's that flexibility that allows them to manipulate their variables and, fingers crossed, produce the best physique, the best athletic performance on the day. Only issue in a professional athlete, not most open and pro competing bodybuilders, would be it's a lot easier to detect most oral steroids over injectable steroids, specifically if you are going to be tested. So have that in the back of your mind. But yeah, if it was an issue, the way that we thought it's been described as by an issue with some people, why are pro bodybuilders still doing it? And the reality is they're still using the products. So there you go. Yeah, let's move on to the next subject, Steve.
All right, so let's get into Belagas top oral options reviews. Let's start with Belagas Anavar. Anavar is one of the most popular oral steroids out there. And Anavar, being a DHT derivative, it does not aromatize into estrogen. It's a great cutter. And, I've used the Belagas Anavar, so I'll give the review myself. Look, I've used a lot of Anavar over the years. A lot of it has been fake. A lot of it hasn't been what they claim. but this Belagas Anavar is fantastic. You know, you go on it, you basically it gives you tremendous results. I love the pumps I get on Belagas Anavar, high repetitions in the gym. You're able to do more, and you just feel fantastic on it. It doesn't make you feel like crap. It doesn't screw up your energy, and you will be able to pop those abs on Anavar. The cuts are tremendous. The biceps, the calves, the pecs. You get the cuts to your muscles on the Anavar. I love it. So one of the ways I use Anavar is somewhere between 20 and 40 milligrams a day, which is a lower dose than a lot of other men use it. But I like to use my steroids a little lower. But you listening out there, you might want to use it a little higher, somewhere between 30 and 50 milligrams a day would work really good with Anavar. And it's one of my favorites, and it's also really good for strength. It's not going to give you crazy strength gains like some other orals out there or some other injectables like Tren would, but it's also one of the best when it comes to good mild strength gains. And I really like Anavar. Mobster, what are your review on Anavar?
Listen, Steve, I mean, this is it. Here's the thing, guys, and proof in the pudding when it comes to using products, especially Beligas Anavar, would be for me when a user says the pumps were crazy, when a user says my strength went crazy in the gym. I've talked about this kind of stuff. It's almost one of those. There's like almost like a complaint actually proves that it's working. I was using Beligas Anavar and the pumps were crippling. What can I do? And we're like, you realize that means it's a legit Anavar. You've got a solid product. You'll see posts like this on our forums. Come and check them out. And they say, oh, well, this guy, you need to get yourself on an organ protector that's solid, then lots of taurine in it. That's going to help you with the pumps. I've talked about what Anavar, Beligas Anavar. It's like one of my top favorite, number one and number two oral steroids. It's a toss up between this and Beligas Dynabol, Steve. Honestly, I know, and as I said just earlier on, I know how strong I'm going to get. I'm literally going to go to add 20 kilos to the bar when I'm running 50 milligrams a day. If you've never used Anavar before, you probably want to run it at 30 milligrams a day, but 50 milligrams a day seems to be the sweet spot. And I've got to be honest, Steve, I think I'm running MK677 on a regular basis. My last stack was literally just Anavar. And I know the result. I did hit PBs, as you know. I went from a 180, 190 kilo, 190, I think was the best I'd done, 190 and 195, to my lifetime best at age 59, 200 kilograms, 440 pounds bench press on just Anavar. And we know we're going to talk about the reasons why Beligas is a solid source, a trusted source, the way that they perform in the market, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I mean, go look for these reviews for yourself, guys, to prove in the pudding, not just Steve and I what we're saying, and see literally, Steve, that people have complained about the pumps, and we know that complaining about a pump makes the product just about as legitimate as it needs. That's exactly what should happen. If you're doing any volume, I don't do that kind of volume, thank Christ, and I have had header pumps. If you're doing any volume on Beligas Anavar, any high repetition stuff, it's any kind of cardiovascular, you might get yourself some taurine before you start, because I guarantee you, running Beligas Anavar, you will have those. And honestly, Steve, they are properly uncomfortable. Dynabol, more pleasurable. Anavar pumps can be absolutely crazy. But for me, it's the strength oral of choice. I respond incredibly well. This is what we're looking at when we're looking at reviews. We see product reviews from people and we say, listen, I did my best bench press ever. They might only be hitting 315, Steve, never mind 440. But the first time in their life, they've got the 315. The first time in their life, they've had a pump that made them stop the workout, made them stop cardio. God, I run 5K, I swim at the weekend, I couldn't do it. The pumps were killing me. That's Beligas Anavar for you. What do you think on that before we move on?
The next one is Beligas Turinabol. Let me tell you something about Turinabol. If you want something that's very mild, that can not only help you in the gym, but also help you on the basketball court, on the beach, swimming, on the beach, playing volleyball, playing soccer, yoga, Pilates, anything. Toronto is the one. So Toronto is I call it the baby. You know, from the reviews that we've seen from people and from my experience using it, everybody pretty much agrees. They're on the same page. Toronto is the baby brother of Anavar. So you're going to get less benefits. You're going to get less pumps and less side effects. Although Anavar doesn't have very many side effects, but you're also going to get good results when it comes to, you know, you're athletic. It's not going to bother you. It's not going to give you those pumps where you're going for a jog and your calves and your back feel like they're going to explode. You see? So
Yeah.
Toronto Ball is really
Yeah.
good for athleticism, and it's a really, really option. So Beligas Toronto Ball has rave reviews, and I've used it. And it's one of my favorites as well, especially if you want something really, really mild. And like, let's say I'm going to do my hot yoga, okay, a 90-minute hot yoga. I've been to these yoga classes where they've had to call the ambulance to come get these people out of there. I'm not kidding. It's one of the toughest things. A lot of you,
Me.
yeah, mobster.
Yeah, me.
Listen, I'll tell you something. If you guys want a challenge, go
Yeah,
do
going to a hot yoga class with women
well,
to
not
see how long
just
you last.
not hot yoga, Bikram hot yoga. And Bikram hot yoga is absolutely brutal. And you're basically going to sweat out 6 or 7 pounds during that 90 minutes, and your heart rate's going to be out of your chest. So, we had a person actually they had to call the ambulance. We had to stop the class and have to drag them out of the room and wait for the ambulance to show up, and we kept the class going. So that's as hardcore as you're going to get. But if you
Yeah.
want to do something like that, Toronto Ball is a good option. You don't want to take trend and then go sweat 6 7 pounds. You'll get yourself into trouble. I was on a deep sea fishing trip one time. I was like throwing up, diarrhea. I was so seasick, and half the boat got seasick. It wasn't just me, but I had been on trend at the time. So my pee was like black. That's how much I really came close to dying on that trip. It was a 7 hour trip, 8 hour trip. So long story short, in that situation, if you like to do a lot of things like climb mountains, go deep sea fishing, do these hardcore yoga classes and stuff like that, Toronto Ball is going to be your best bet when it comes to using an oral steroid. So that's how I would use Toronto Ball. For those of you, if you've never tried it before, I highly recommend it. So, I mean, that sums up the reviews on my end, Mobster. Anything you want to add on Toronto Ball? Well, the dosing on Toronto Ball, I say 20 to 40 milligrams a
Yeah.
day would be the dosage. But if you want to just use it for pure bodybuilding, you could go higher, 50, 60 milligrams a day.
I'll expand a little bit, Steve. So number one is Tyrannobolt, and I've talked about this on other shows, seems to be like the insider guru prep coach's drug of choice. There are always going to be disagreements between how to run certain products, how someone would prepare some of the competition and whatever else. But one of the things that kind of fascinated me was how different gurus, different steroid experts, different people that had some kind of knowledge base when it comes to PEDs, specifically steroids, they all agreed that one of their favorite ones was Tyrannobolt. And you go, why? Why? Because it's like Anavar. You're not going to blow up. You're not going to put on 10 pounds. Every time I ever used Anavar, I might put on 5 pounds. I've used other injectables and put on 20 pounds on the cycle. I've done more. I've been crazy heavy doing exactly the same injectable stack, but I never got crazy heavy on Anavar. Tyrannobolt's the same. So you go, well, why would you use it? Well, Steve just mentioned trend. We did a show recently where we talked about one of the ways to negate the side effects of using trend was to use Tyrannobolt because it helped you maintain some, if not all, of your pre-cycle, pre-trend cardiovascular ability. In other words, you was able to go out and get your steps. You was able to do some kind of cardiovascular running, cycling, rowing, or whatever else. Not to the same level as pre-cycle because trend will have an effect, but keep some of that cardiovascular ability that would have otherwise been lost. And I've touched upon, as we both have in other shows, when we talked specifically what T-Bowl was created for enable actual athletes that in the Olympic Games, in the Commonwealth Games, in national competitions, etc., what we call actual athletics, as track, discus, shot put, javelin, so on and so forth, to have power, that sort of combination of strength and cardiovascular ability So not getting winded, dropping down body weight from some of the more harsher oral steroids and injectable steroids that were given to them back in the day, and then they're specifically developed for by the East Germans with Russian support, but of course, other athletes, European athletes, international athletes, sort of learned that particular trick, and it enables them to have that athletic ability as and when required. You don't always get to say, oh, it's going to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something gets brought forward, you've still got that power, you can still perform. So the athletic enhancement was fantastic. And that's probably why you would see more people using it, keeping some level of cardio that's going to help them condition the physique and so on and so forth. So that for me is absolutely. And again, if you want to go and check out the reviews will stay the same. I'm on trend, but I can still go out and get some steps. I'm not killing myself. I've done a cycle, Steve, of another company's product, and it was hard work getting the third cardio session of the day and another 2,000 steps, 3,000 steps, getting that in at the end of the day because I could feel the effects of the trend that was part of the product I was using. I should have run something like Beligas Turinabol just to assist me with that. And I think that I've had better results on the cut/recomposition that I did. So, definitely one for me in the future. But again, come on the forums, check out the whys and wherefores, see the results, especially if someone has included Turinabol, not solo. I would actually argue, for me, Turinabol is a stacking drug. I don't think that I would run Turinabol on its own as an oral, but I would include it, especially if I know that the stack orals, injectables, etc., what else I'm running is going to impact it, especially from bulking, but I want to maintain some sort of cardiovascular, heart health, and so on and so forth. So to do that comes, it's not going to do that on its own. You need to still get out there and do the steps. You still need to get out there and do the cardio. So that would be me on Turinabol, Steve. I'll touch upon the Beligas Anadrol now. Now, this is one where Beligas, especially, Steve, because they got solid products. And again, guys, check out the reviews, come on the forum, have a look at what people have said. Anadrol can be, for some people, the wonder drug. Now, it can have its side effects, does have its side effects. And I think actually, in a perverse way, again, like the pumps that come with Anavar, you know that you've got a solid product like Beligas Anadrol when the complaint is that you've put on 20 pounds. The complaint, Steve, I didn't expect it. Mobster, what the fuck? And I'm just using a sensible amount of Anadrol and I put on so much weight really quickly. It's right up there, Steve. I've heard, this is not common, but I've heard of 21, 22 pounds. I'd say you're looking at somewhere between 10 and 12 pounds for the average individual. And that's in a 4 to 6 week cycle, Steve. The ability for people to grow, for some people to grow on Anadrol is absolutely crazy. I know that you've got another sort of a view in terms of what happens to users. So talk about the typical response of some users when they're using Beligas Anadrol.
Yeah, and I actually saw a review today. Someone said, look, Anadrol, this is a guy who, uses tons of Tren and tons of other steroids, yet with Anadrol, he can't tolerate it. So that shows you that Anadrol is no joke. And Anadrol is one of those steroids. He told me, Steve, you got 4 weeks to get as much mass on your frame as possible. What are you going to do? And for me, it's going to be Anadrol. And Anadrol is one of those that's in your system quick. It's got a pretty short half-life, not as short as the Anabol, which we're going to talk about next, but a pretty short half-life. I think it's about 8 hours. So it's going to be peaking in your system within a couple days. And it's going to absolutely blow you up. I mean, really, the first week, you're going to know you're on this stuff. So really, you take this stuff that the reviews that I've seen, and I've used it myself. It's not something I would use today, but I used it, like 15 years ago. But one of the things it does is if you take this stuff, you eat the right way, you train the right way, you will absolutely blow up on the stuff and you'll change your physique in just 4 weeks on this stuff. So this is what Beligas Anadrol is capable of doing. It is capable of completely changing your physique. Mobster?
Quickly, Steve, one thing would be the dose. I'm probably going to suggest 50 milligrams. I have heard, and I've discussed this on previous shows, the medical use is actually higher, normally with the other way around when we talk about PEDs. So the medical use can easily be equivalent of 100 milligrams per day, depending on the condition and what you weigh and so on and so forth. But 50 milligrams is great for most, pushing it out there to some people. Again, it comes down to the response. I will say, and this is again one of those, how great the product is, so you've got to have to be careful. sometimes on the forums we'll have an individual that wants to add a little bit of muscle, and so we recommend obviously the T-Bow, Yanivar, and so on and so forth. They can't get too big too quick because they work at an office or they work in an environment where if you blow up, people are going to ask questions. So Anadrol might be one of the times where I say, don't use it if you're worried about putting on 10, 15, 20 pounds, as we know some users do, because you are going to go up a shirt size. People are going to notice the fact that you come back from 2-week holiday swole as fuck. They will notice. They will say, what the hell you've been doing? And especially if you're in an environment, as the few users are, Steve, occasionally where you might be tested because of the nature of your job at work. If you respond, as we know some people do, to Beligas Anadrol, you might come back weighing 20 pounds more than when you left. You might suddenly go at the beginning of the month this weight and come back end of the month 20 pounds, and people are going to go, that motherfucker's on PEDs. We know he's on drugs. Test his ass. So you need to be careful. I mean, I'm actually going to take that as a positive, Steve, because I don't have to worry about these things. My only issue, and I say this, is that I don't respond to it, but I know people that do. I know people that cast iron guarantee 20 pounds, and especially if they are new to training, Steve. So this is one of those things that I wouldn't normally recommend it because there are some side effects, but I would actually say, listen, if you've never used any PED, and we all know how successful certain first cycles can be, and the most users will have probably their best gains, the best response to any PED first cycle. I wouldn't normally say, yeah, Anadrol would be my first cycle choice. It would not. But if you do use it on your first cycle, that's where you're going to see these crazy gains that I've mentioned. Your body's just going to go absolutely crazy, and especially if training, nutrition, and everything else on point. So yeah, it can be an absolutely fantastic gainer for some people. And I think Steve said this on other shows, great for strength as well. So definitely check out the Beligas Anadrol, Steve. Listen, I'll start with this. This one is the absolute daddy of orals, the true breakfast of champions. You used to, Steve, you used to be able to buy, and I wish I still could. I actually think I looked for something 6 or 8 months ago. I was having one of those retro moments, and I swear the fuck I was going to wear this shirt to the gym. You used to be able to buy from one of the bodybuilding t-shirt companies in the American magazines a Breakfast of Champions t-shirt. I think you can do something on Etsy, and it's got a bottle of D-Bowl pills on the t-shirt. And I'm like, mother, I've worn stuff like that to the gym before. I don't give a fuck. So the idea of it is, and again, it's probably back in the day, the easiest oral to get hold of. Even now, and Steve and I have done a show on this when we talked about the most popular performance enhancing drugs, specifically talking about steroids, oral and injectable. This was still like number one, Steve, on certainly number one oral, and right up there, I believe Tesip was number one of all kinds of orals or injectables. So it is the daddy. We talked about the history, the whole business with the York gang and Ziegler and all the kind of stuff, and a handful of pills and how they were taking 5s and then it became 10s, the whole history. Right. And it was definitely my first steroid ever. So it's kind of out there. I would say, generally speaking, you would have thought actually, oh, something better came along, or people would have done different stacks and different cycles and different orals and different injectables and all that. No, still out there, still kicking ass. I mentioned earlier on, still being used by pro and all competing bodybuilders, still included in the stacks. My gains, what was I gaining, Steve? The first 2-3 times I used any PED was Dianabol, just the first 3 cycles. Moderate, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 30 to 50 milligrams a day. I think I touched 50 milligrams, but I've got such great results with 30. I didn't really need to push it to 50 all the time. So I was manipulating that particular variable. And every fucking time, Steve, I would gain 10 pounds on cycle. And I was keeping at least 5 to 6 pounds of those first 3 cycles. I think the first year was just 1. I think I ran 2 cycles in the second year. And then I think I did Anavar after that, and then started to look at other injectables and things. And I was also around when I started competing. So my first couple of cycles were, how the fuck am I going to deal with steroids? What's going to happen to my body? Can I handle the issues, the side effects? I did my research. I went out and bought books and so on. And yeah, Dianabol was probably el numero uno, especially when I was using it, Steve. So late 90s, early 2000s, was still #1. And I think it was one of those things where, again, we've talked about Dynabol, pleasurable pumps. Anavar can be uncomfortable. The sheer gains that we talked about with Beligas Anadrol, for some users, is almost uncomfortable because you put on so much mass so quickly. Dynabol, again, I'm relatively tall, 10 pounds, was handleable. Didn't kill me going up and downstairs like a 20-pound Sustecker cycle. Didn't kill me with the pumps. It's kind of pleasurable in terms of just the pumps. It kind of makes you hungry. You're okay with eating a little bit full. It's good for your appetite. The leverage that I get from being 10 pounds bigger on an average individual, and I am a little bit taller, on an average individual, 10 pounds is an inch all over. So let's say your arms are 16, end of the cycle, 17 inches, motherfucker. And that's just keeping your solid training on point. Bring your training up a notch, and who knows where you can be. And again, it's the history of the iron game, and specifically the history of using performance enhancing drugs. Almost certainly, Steve, I would say it's going to be some kind of testosterone ester, and it's going to be Dynabol, #1 and #2 topic before you really get deep on the history of the eye game and how labs came along and what other products were used, etc., etc., and especially when it comes to training and using PEDs. So Beligas is going to be that game thing when they're talking about, Steve, in your reviews, rate pumps using Beligas Dynabol, increases on the lifts in the gym, eating more food, blowing up like a motherfucker. Again, not the 20 pounds that you might get with Anadrol, but certainly up there. And again, as I said, well, my buddy just recently was running just for the last couple of weeks. And obviously literally the last couple of weeks dropping water as he did, it's still lean as fuck now, but running 100 milligrams of Anavar and the higher doses of the Danabol just in the last four weeks to 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, Anavar drying out, looking lean and muscular going into the competition. So it's holding as much size and muscle as possible. Talk about your experience, especially obviously with Beligas Dynabol, Steve, and the reviews that we've seen.
Yeah, the Beligas Dynabol, really, I've seen reviews, Mobster, of guys who put on a lot of weight, body mass, and it's not going to be clean. So keep that in mind. Some people have actually complained, I put on too much body weight on Dynabol. I got moon face on Dynabol, and that's what it does. So you want to make sure, and we're going to talk about it shortly, that you're using an AI with Dynabol to avoid that moon face. Next one we're going to talk about is Beligas Winstrol, which is the polar opposite. You're not going to get water retention on Winstrol. It's a DHT derivative. It's the best steroid for competing going into a show. You want to make sure you use 25 to 100 milligrams a day. The average dose is 50 milligrams. I personally like 25 milligrams. And Winstrol has a lot more side effects than people think, because it can affect your hair, it can affect your prostate, it can affect your cholesterol. It's got a lot of more androgenic side effects than people think, than what they would think on paper. Everyone thinks, oh, it's a DHT derivative, it's a dry steroid, it's not going to come with side effects. These are myths that were created in the 80s and in the 90s by guys who were meatheads, but a lot of them were just parroting the same information over again. So a lot of the reviews that we see on Winstrol, the good is that it dries you out. The good is that it will make you more cut than anything else. But the bad is that it's the most ruthless steroid when it comes to your head hair, where even someone like me who's not prone to head hair loss, knock on wood, I got the good genetics for hair. I still have my hair in my mid-40s. But what it does, even with me, is when I would take a shower and shampoo my hair, I'd look down, I'd see hair on my hands from using Winstrol. So Winstrol definitely is going to do that. And look, it's going to dry your joints a lot. And again, I'm not prone to joint issues. I have short, stubby limbs. I don't have long, lanky limbs like your people, Mobster, over there in Northern Europe. So for me, I shouldn't have these joint issues, right? But even on Winstrol, I had joint issues. And when you're doing like a curl, for example, you can feel it's like a rubber band in your elbow. So those are the reviews behind Winstrol. There's the good of Winstrol, there's the bad of Winstrol, but when it comes to drawing you out ahead of a competition or a photo shoot, there's nothing better. Talk about that.
I would be very surprised, Steve. In fact, you and I have actually discussed death cycles and so on and so forth. And we know from the analysis of what an athlete was using before he passed away, we know that Winstrol is incredibly common. Doesn't mean that you're going to die if you use Winstrol. It's just that when they've done the blood test, they were able to identify the steroids that particular person used. So we know cast iron no. We've seen the online examples of that person's autopsy, of their drug test, of the analysis of what was in their system, and a very high volume of multiple PEDs, but specifically Winstrol. And we know, obviously, from talking to competing athletes, from people on the logs, on the forums that compete, that Winstrol is incredibly common. The only issue, and Steve's already touched upon it, in my mind, because I get 2 fucks about my hair, Steve, I shave that bitch. But I was like, I'm going to make it multiple, 2 issues. If you are concerned, and again, this is almost a positive, Steve, in that if you know you've got legitimate Winstrol, if it's going to have an effect on your body, because here it is having that effect. Like Steve says, good genetics for hair, still seeing a little bit too much hair on the palm of his hand, going down the plug hole, etc., etc. And some people talk about that stuff. So yeah, the other one, of course, is the dryness of joints. So Steve touched upon. You should do your research, guys, or listen to our shows, of course, purely and simply because you know that that's having an effect. Actually, we talked about it in terms of how you can assist yourself with that. So yeah, for me, Beligas Winstrol, definitely something out there if you want to get lean and you want to get cut. And again, come on the forum, see what the guys have said about using it and the effect it's had on the body, and see their before and after photographs. Steve. Let's move on to the next couple.
Why don't you touch on Proviron?
Right, so we actually did a show on this, and this is one of those things what I should have known, and we learn when we do the research to refresh our memories, especially if we're doing an updated podcast. Proviron. Why would I now include Proviron? It's not a great muscle builder. No, in fact, it's almost negligible. You're more likely to keep muscle while you're cutting using Proviron. You might, maybe, Steve, maybe get 1 or 2 pounds, but I've literally put an order in. I've got some products coming with Proviron included in that. And why am I going to now use it? It attaches to or has an effect on positive effects, SHBG. And essentially, I put it in crude terms, Steve, I'm going to have more free testosterone available for muscle building and strength enhancement purposes on the next cycle that I do. So for me, that I could take Anavar, I could do another bulking cycle, let's say my favorite Sasdeca bulking cycle with Beligas, with whoever, and I will include Proviron to enhance the effects of a moderate dose of any of the PEDs I'm going to use and get more out of that cycle. So that would be my number one reason for using. What about you, Stephen, the effects it has on the body?
Yeah, and it makes the other steroids in your stack work better. Using it by itself isn't going to do much for you. Some people will use it like in bridge or in PCT, but when you use it on a cycle, you want to definitely stack it, and it makes everything around you work better. So you can actually run less of any of these other orals that we've talked about or any injectables from Belagas. You can run less and get more out of them thanks to using Proviron. So 25 to 50 milligrams a day is what you want to do. Let's touch really quick on some more. Now, these are non-anabolic steroids that we're going to talk about. And we're talking about Nolvadex and Clomid. These are selective estrogen receptor modulators, and these are commonly used in post-cycle therapy. These will help give you a soft landing when you're coming off these hormones. So Belagas has you covered if you need PCT products. And it's important to run a PCT if you want to prevent a hard landing and lose all your gains after your cycle. How many people do you see they run steroids and then they get good results and then they come off and they lose everything? That's a very common thing that we see. So you definitely want to get yourself covered by using Nolvadex and Clomid. The
Yeah.
next one is going to be Belagas, Aromacin, and Arimidex. And these are not SERMs, but these are aromatase inhibitors, AIs. And these are very important on cycle. If you're using testosterone, especially at moderate doses or high doses, you're using the Dianabol, especially at moderate doses or higher, you want to use Aromacin or Arimidex. And Belagas has you covered with those. Those will help prevent estrogen from getting out of control when you're on cycle. And so these are basically ancillaries that we want to make sure that we're having on hand. So always keep Aromacin and Arimidex on hand whenever you run a cycle, and then always keep Nolvadex and Clomid for your PCT. Nice thing about these orals is you can buy them in the last few years. So you can buy a bunch of them and just keep them. This way, when you're cycling steroids, you don't forget to get them, or you don't run out or anything like that. You can always have them on hand. So, Mobster, why don't
Yes,
you touch on the a little bit about that and then touch on the Viagra Cialis?
yeah, I've made the mistakes in the past, guys, and I'm not the only person that's ever done this of not having everything I want at the beginning. What Steve said, having it on hand. I don't ever make that mistake anymore. So literally, I don't want to be, for example, having issues with estrogen and then not have something that's going to help me more estrogen, AI available, and have to wait a week or 2 weeks or whatever for it to arrive. I've got the problem and I want to deal with it now. So yeah, absolutely, Steve. I've done stuff in the past where I've waited a few days for something to arrive, and I've already kind of started using PDs. No, I always make sure that I've got everything at the beginning. You don't know if you're going to have issues with customs, delivery, the mailman, whatever, right? So make sure you've got your products there, and make sure. Listen, I don't like the idea that the horse is already bolted, and here I am having problems, and I'm going to have to deal with. So I have things on hand, even if I'm not going to use them. I can always use them on the next cycle. When I might have a problem, I might have an issue that comes up, I might have to cut my cycle short. So I'm ready for the PCT and I'm ready for any issues on cycle. That makes sense to me, Steve. Look, let's talk about Beligas full stop. Beligas, and we did a show not that long ago, and I said, we went onto their website, Steve, and you and I were amazed, genuinely amazed, and in a way that we shouldn't really have been, because we've been doing these shows for a long time, because we've done 600 Evo shows, because we've done multiple podcasts about different sources, approved sources and products and steroids and how to use them and so on and so forth. But we were blown away by the range. And I think the thing that really caught our imagination the most, and I expanded on this on one of the shows when we talked about Beligas, Steve, was why have they got this product? And we said, you know what? I think if you looked at the product and go, well, they got this thing, it seems a bit different. It's got this and it's got this. Go, hang on, that's exactly the way that you would stack it. That's exactly the way that you would run it. You'd have 200 milligrams of X, you'd have 300 milligrams of Y. That's a super common cycle. And what Beligas have done is they put that together in a product. Instead of you going, oh, okay, I'm going to run 500 milligrams of this and 200 milligrams of that, and I have 700 milligrams a week, and this is a stack, and I'm going to get this injectable to do this and this injectable. No, Beligas have done it for you. They got the singular steroid. They have the ability for you to put that stack or cycle together yourself. But some of their products and the ones that we was like, wow, they've done the work. They put this together for you. So that was number one. Number two was the makeup of the company. We quite often talk about steroid producing companies, and we say we hold them up to a pharmaceutical company. We say, oh, so huge pharmaceutical mega corporation produces this drug and that drug, and these are the standards that a pharmaceutical company has to adhere to. And we then compare a steroid producing company to a pharmaceutical company, and we say, listen, they're right up there, the comparison. No, Beligas is a pharmaceutical company based in Belgium producing pharmaceutical products. It is not a steroid lab. It is not a steroid producing company that has pharmaceutical quality products. It is a pharmaceutical company. Talk about why you like Beligas, Stephen, why we approve it as a source.
Yeah, and I've used Beligas a lot over the past 3 years. And look, when you order from them, you know what you're getting. You order Anavar, you know you're getting Anavar. You order testosterone, you know you're getting testosterone. Any of these orals that we talked about on this podcast, Proviron, Winstrol, Dianabol, Anadrol, Tironabol, all of them, D-Bol. I mean, when you order, you know you're getting. And it's really, a lot of people are under a misconception. They think with orals can't be faked. Why? Why can't orals be faked? They're putting something in a pill. They could put anything in that pill. They could put sugar in that pill.
Yep.
Put it in a
just a binder and a filler, Steve. You don't have to put any active ingredient in if you want it to be an absolute wanker about it. You really don't. And it's super easy. You can buy pill presses on eBay. If you want to be making your ecstasy pills, you can buy pill presses. So how do you build up a reputation? You build up a reputation like Beligas by producing solid products. Literally, when people are complaining about the side effects, the pumps were crazy. I blew up too quickly. I said, there's the positives. You literally got too big too quick, or too strong too quick, or the pumps were really, really bad, and no one told me. Well, yes, they had. We're doing shows on those things. And Beligas get to stay in the marketplace selling solid product by producing solid products day after day, week after week, year after year. You don't get to be as big as they are. I mean, one example, and Steve used this when we discussed proof sources before, and Beligas is up there for that particular reason, right? You go, right, literally the biggest reseller of brands in the industry, and there are multiple companies that resell. That means they take a brand like Beligas and they include it in their product lineup and they sell it and distribute it all over the world. Okay, why is Beligas on that list? Because they aren't getting complaints from customers, that the customers know that it's legit. They have super next to no issues with having the same product back. Any company, especially Beligas, that any production issues, let the reseller know as soon as possible, sort that out straight away. And the last one, and I'll just finish on this, Steve, because we touched on this in other shows, is we are seeing products getting tested. It used to be $1,000 per test, and you had to get to a specific lab or have someone that works at a college or a university in a lab that could test a product for a buddy. And even if it was done properly, it was $1,000. But if you had a buddy to do it, $1,000 worth of work. Now the prices have come down or are comparable in terms of overall price. To get products tested for less $1,000, you'd probably get 5-10 products tested. We have seen company products not just tested in-house, Beligas would do that, not just sending out to an independent lab and having your product tested. So you're checking the in-house processes, you're checking your quality controls on point, you're checking that the lab that you have in-house is good to go. But also buyers, users of the end product, taking Beligas, sending it off to a lab at their own pocket, at their own expense, having bought it from a reseller or direct, and then have it lab tested and coming back and it's positive, meaning it is exactly where it needs to be. It's within 5 or 10 milligrams here, 5 or 10 milligrams there, orals and injectables, that the products are exactly what they're supposed to be. And in that way, you know that if you don't get the results that you didn't expect, it's because you fucked up with your nutrition, you fucked up with your training. If your nutrition and your training is on point, then a company like Beligas provides you with a solid product, which will almost guarantee, all things being equal, hard work, good nutrition, rest and recovery, and the product, you are guaranteed, almost guaranteed, to get the best results you're possibly going to. That's why we approve, rate, recommend, and that's why we're doing this show on Beligas, to let you know what you think. What do you think about that, Steve, before we go into the disclaimer?
Yeah, that sums it up pretty good. And like I said, I've been using them for 3 years. I'm really impressed with them. I will continue to use them in my future cycle. So if you guys have any questions, come on the forums and ask away. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep, let us know in the comments below. Come onto the forums like Steve said. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment apply.